I Am the Swarm. Author, Quantum Wizard. Chapter 321, Speculation. Could it be that our initial colonial behavior appeared too aggressive? But before the expedition, we had the Cat's Ear Project. A lone scientific research ship hardly conveys aggression, does it? Exactly. If they wanted to communicate with us, they would have sent a diplomatic message after capturing the Cat's Ear spaceship. I have another idea. What idea? That the technological level of the Cat's Ear spaceship led them to underestimate the Recon civilization's capabilities. A senior Recon strategist interjected. At first, they might have thought we were just a fledgling civilization barely stepping into space. Honestly, without the ancient starship's assistance, we would have been exactly as they assumed. The room fell into contemplative silence. Supporters of both theories, whether it was aggressive expansion or technological misjudgment, shared one consensus: the swarm's technology had not utterly overwhelmed Recon technology. In wars between two civilizations of relatively equal technological standing, the resource expenditure was astronomical. The defense of planet Ray's was a prime example. The Recons had deployed 3 fleets there, along with a significant number of engineering and security personnel on the planet's surface. The daily consumption of these forces was staggering, a burden shouldered by their entire civilization. Planet Ray's had no colonies or large space stations nearby, so all supplies, food, clothing, and equipment had to be transported from the rear. This created an unimaginable logistical cost, exhausting the Recon civilization's foundations. Similarly, the swarm's supply lines were even longer. Although the Recons didn't know what sustained the swarm, they assumed it consumed even more resources. In such a context, prolonged conflict benefited neither side. For civilizations that had stepped beyond their home worlds and could utilize resources from other planets, resource scarcity was no longer a pressing issue. Rare metals and raw materials once scarce on their home worlds were abundant in space. The resources within the Recon star system, 10 major planets, asteroid belts, and solar energy could sustain the Recon civilization's development for millennia, even tens of thousands of years. If this was true for the Recons, it should be similar for the swarm. If resources weren't the primary motivator, then there had to be another reason for the war. At this scale, it couldn't be over something as trivial as mating disputes. Besides, the two species' aesthetics were undoubtedly incompatible. So, in this scenario, what was most important? Technology or knowledge? One by one, the Recons came to this realization, and a chill ran through them. Could the swarm have discovered the secrets of the ancient starship? Many doubted this theory. Even among the senior generals in the conference room, only about 30% were familiar with the ancient starship's details. The rest merely knew of its existence, without any deeper understanding. Under such conditions, how could the secret have been leaked? Of course, for now, this was a hypothetical question, a mere conjecture. Still, the Recons examined themselves and couldn't find anything else the swarm might covet. From their perspective, the swarm's technology was slightly more advanced than theirs. Returning to the senior strategist's theory, perhaps the crux lay in the swarm's initial misjudgment of the Recons. Judging by the Cat's Ear spaceship's technological level, the Recons must have appeared as an insignificant, easily subdued civilization. However, the Recons had foolishly provoked the swarm by advancing with their fleets. Normally, this might not have been a problem, but the Recons' sudden technological leap was perplexing. Decades ago, they had relied on solar sail engines, and now they wielded battleships with interstellar engines capable of achieving 1/5 the speed of light. Such a rapid technological progression was difficult to attribute solely to independent research. Even the Recons found this explanation far-fetched, let alone the swarm. When a minor player grows so rapidly, it suggests one of two possibilities: they either had backing or stumbled upon a major discovery. This also explained certain perplexing swarm tactics, such as their lack of aggression in pursuing retreating Recon forces, which at times felt deliberately lenient. At this point, it became clear that the swarm's past actions reflected their own uncertainties about the Recon civilization. Concerned that the Recons might have powerful allies, the swarm refrained from taking extreme measures. Based on prior engagements, the swarm evidently operated under the direction of highly intelligent command units. Their calculated strategies, including the assault on planet Ray's, seemed more like exploratory probes. If the Recons had indeed had external backing and summoned reinforcements beyond their known capabilities, the swarm's dormant installations on planet Ray's might never have been activated. After multiple tests, however, the swarm appeared to have assessed certain truths and falsehoods about the Recons, emboldening them to launch further offensives while reducing the degree of restraint. For instance, in the latest engagement, the swarm directly destroyed 20% of the Recon fleet. Should the Recons fail to demonstrate any hidden strength, the next step might be a full-scale invasion. But the Recons had no hidden benefactor or ally to rely on. This realization sparked frustration among some Recons, who questioned the initial decision to explore the T-8 5-star system. Yet, at this point, such complaints were meaningless. They were caught in a paradox. If they failed to display advanced technological capabilities, they would be dismissed by the swarm as a minor threat, potentially inviting immediate annihilation. Conversely, revealing their advancements had only provoked the swarm's aggression further. The Recons in the conference room began to grasp the gravity of their predicament. If the swarm truly sought the treasure they believed the Recons possessed, conflict between the two civilizations seemed inevitable. The swarm had no way of knowing what the Recons had discovered, nor could they gauge the full extent of its value or the Recons' potential capabilities. In a matter of decades, the Recons had advanced their technological level by several leaps. What might they achieve in another few decades? A century? Judging by the swarm's reactions and the emergence of specialized weapons targeting swarm tactics, the possibility of the Recons eventually surpassing them seemed plausible. Some Recons bitterly wished they could slap themselves. Why flaunt their advancements? Why not feign weakness? Unveiling new weaponry had only served to provoke the swarm further. Would the swarm allow the Recons the time needed to continue their rapid development? Placing themselves in the swarm's position, the Recons could see no alternative. To ensure their species' survival, the swarm would logically prioritize eliminating threats, especially one like the Recons, whose rapid technological progress was fueled by external resources. This left the Recons in a bind. One possible solution, it seemed, was to offer up the ancient starship, the treasure fueling the swarm's suspicions. This might halt the war, but doing so would place the fate of the Recon civilization in the hands of another species, rendering them vulnerable and subject to external control. Antonio, however, vehemently opposed such a course of action. To him, surrendering the ancient starship would make him a traitor in the eyes of history, reviled until the Recon civilization's potential extinction. This left only one path forward: resistance. For better or worse, the Recons had no choice but to fight against the swarm with every ounce of their strength. Chapter 322, Clues. Without Luo Wen's knowledge, a group of Recon senior generals and strategists had concocted a rationale for why the swarm was attacking their civilization. Even the instances where the swarm appeared to hold back were retroactively explained with surprisingly convincing arguments. Had Luo Wen not been directly involved, even he might have found these explanations persuasive. From the Recon's perspective, their interpretation of the swarm's motives, while slightly divergent in certain details, ultimately led to the same conclusion. However, Luo Wen's interest in the Recon's so-called treasure had waned. With Clio in his ranks, the allure of the ancient starship was no longer as pressing. After all, Clio's advanced level of intelligence allowed access to all the data the Recons had gathered from their investigations. As a mechanical civilization, the Recons excelled in certain detection methods far beyond the swarm's capabilities. Even if the swarm acquired the ancient starship, they wouldn't be able to process or utilize it as effectively as the Recons currently did. With this in mind, Luo Wen decided it was better to let the Recons continue their analysis. This saved resources and allowed him to observe any potential underlying schemes. His careful scrutiny of events had not been fruitless. Luo Wen had already uncovered some intriguing details. The Recons, through their study of the ancient starship, had developed a gravitational wave-based radar technology capable of detecting cloaked units. This advancement was built upon gravitational theories derived from the starship. Over the years, the intelligent entities hidden among the Recons had grown to a substantial number. As a result, much of what the Recons developed was effectively transparent to the swarm. The new radar technology and its theoretical foundations had long been acquired by the swarm. After digesting and refining this knowledge, the swarm's intelligent entities had innovatively adapted it into biological technology. In some respects, biological technology appeared to offer superior performance in handling gravitational waves. Drawing upon various analogous biological organs for inspiration, the swarm had implemented the technology more effectively than the Recons. Several newly engineered observer bugs equipped with this technology were deployed, hidden within the void. These observer bugs detected unusual disturbances near the battlefield on planet Rays. The exchange of fire and the deployment of weaponry generated countless chaotic energy waves. It would have been easy to overlook these anomalies if not for Luo Wen's prior vigilance. Revisiting the observer bugs' records, Luo Wen identified small, hidden objects in the target area. These objects were too diminutive for Recon observation instruments to detect. If the swarm hadn't infiltrated the Recon ranks with insiders, Luo Wen might have suspected these objects to be some secret Recon weaponry. But with his understanding of the Recon's operational capabilities, he knew they had no deployments in that vicinity. The objects seemed unaware of the observer bugs disguised as meteoroids, confirming their presence and suggesting they belonged to neither the Recons nor the swarm. This discovery intrigued Luo Wen. It implied the existence of a third-party force operating in the shadows. Perhaps these entities were neighboring civilizations drawn by the nuclear detonations, or maybe they were the Watchers Luo Wen had previously speculated about. Luo Wen leaned toward the hypothesis that these hidden entities were Watchers. After all, Godzilla had lived on planet T855 in the neighboring star system for an untold number of years, periodically venting its emotions with bursts of nuclear breath. If there were any spacefaring civilizations nearby, like the Recons, they would likely have investigated these anomalies. Whether any civilizations had done so before, Luo Wen didn't know. What he did know was that in the past century, only the Recons had ventured to explore the neighboring star system. Godzilla's nuclear breath had relatively low yield. If detected from a great distance, it might simply appear as natural stellar activity, indistinguishable from emissions from a star or a planetary surface. Based on this, Luo Wen judged that the only advanced powers near the neighboring star system were the Swarm and the Recons. However, the nuclear detonations unleashed by the Recons in the region were of a completely different magnitude. Hundreds of high-yield nuclear weapons detonated almost simultaneously, releasing an energy signature too conspicuous to ignore. This event could have drawn the attention of even more distant civilizations. Herein lay a problem. If the distant civilization's technology was comparable to the Recons, they might have dispatched a fleet to investigate, but such a fleet would still be en route. Conversely, if their technology was more advanced and capable of faster-than-light travel, they should have already expanded into the region during their growth. Yet neither Luo Wen's personal experiences nor the Recons' records mentioned such an expansion. The only plausible explanation was that these Watchers had arrived long ago but chose to remain hidden, silently watching from the shadows, a scenario perfectly aligning with the concept of Watchers. The hidden objects detected near planet rays were located at the site of the Recons' second wave of nuclear detonations, which had occurred only a decade prior. If these objects had traveled from a distant civilization, they must have either been en route coincidentally or possessed exceptional speed to arrive so quickly. Luo Wen, however, was puzzled. In the Swarm's early operations, they had never considered the possibility of external Watchers. Many of their activities were conducted openly, such as deploying observer bugs into space. If Watchers truly existed, it seemed unlikely that they wouldn't have taken precautions against the Swarm's surveillance. Yet the cloaked units near planet rays appeared to show no such caution. Whether out of overconfidence in their own technology or due to the chaotic battlefield conditions, they hadn't attempted to avoid detection by the observer bugs. Could it be that the observer bugs' cloaking technology had become so advanced that even these entities failed to notice them? After much deliberation, Luo Wen surmised that the hidden entities might simply not know the Swarm had obtained gravitational wave radar detection technology. Thus, they didn't anticipate that the Swarm could observe them. Out of caution, Luo Wen chose not to alert these entities to his awareness of their presence. Pretending to remain oblivious, he continued with the Swarm's plans as if nothing had changed. He wanted to see what these Watchers were truly up to. To Luo Wen, these furtive entities weren't likely to harbor noble intentions. Fortunately, their misstep in revealing themselves had eased his concerns. Their detectability reduced their aura of mystery considerably. After occupying planet rays, the Swarm didn't rush to advance further. Instead, they used the planet as a forward base for recuperation and reorganization. Though the Swarm had been developing beneath planet rays' surface for over a decade, the subterranean space and resources were limited. Consequently, while reinforcements included many space octopuses at both mature and larval stages, none had yet advanced to primordial bodies. The Swarm had deployed a total of just over 15,000 primordial bodies in the two battles for planet rays, representing only half of the Swarm's forces in the Recon star system. With planet rays now serving as an outpost, future primordial bodies arriving in the Recon system could pause briefly at the outer asteroid belts to regroup before proceeding directly to join the main force. Chapter 323, Planet Izumo. The Recon star system was, after all, the Recon's main battlefield, and over the decades, they had installed numerous surveillance devices throughout the system. Even after their defeat and retreat, these surveillance systems could not be cleared out quickly. The Swarm, meanwhile, made no effort to conceal their movements, leaving the Reckons well informed about the incoming reinforcements. In the second battle for planet rays, the swarm's primordial bodies suffered minimal losses. If their numbers continued to grow unchecked, the Reckons' chances of victory would dwindle further. The Reckon leadership was well aware of this, but they had no effective countermeasures. The three main fleets had sustained heavy losses in the second battle for planet rays, losing nearly 20% of their ships, with the remainder requiring extensive repairs. Even if they included newly constructed vessels, the Reckons could muster fewer than 1,000 ships ready for immediate deployment. This number was theoretically sufficient to intercept the swarm's reinforcements, but the risks were enormous, and the cost-benefit ratio was unacceptably low. To launch a surprise interception, the Reckons would have to bypass planet rays, now firmly in swarm hands and defended by thousands of primordial bodies. Moreover, the swarm's reinforcements did not move individually. They waited until reaching critical mass before moving as a group. If the Reckons' interception force were delayed, they risked being caught between the reinforcements and the swarm forces on planet rays. Such a scenario, being attacked from both sides, could result in the total annihilation of the interception force. For the Reckons, losing 1,000 warships would be catastrophic, tantamount to forcing a surrender. However, failing to intercept the swarm reinforcements meant the swarm's growing strength would steadily erode the Reckons' ability to resist, drawing them closer to a slow and inevitable death. Faced with this grim reality, the Reckons adopted a fatalistic attitude, focusing on immediate survival over long-term strategy. The discovery of the Watchers faction, however, emboldened the swarm. Confident in their position, they acted more aggressively. After uniting part of their reinforcements, the swarm stationed 5,000 primordial bodies to defend planet rays. Another 2,000 rested in space to recover, while over 8,000 primordial bodies formed a fleet advancing deeper into the Reckon star system. Planet 8 of the Rays system was a small terrestrial planet, only a tenth the size of planet Rays. Its diminutive size meant it had no natural satellites and limited capacity for a planetary defense system. Due to the defensive advantage provided by planet Rays in the front and the twin star defensive zone behind, the Reckons had only installed observational devices on Planet 8, leaving it without a defense system. When the swarm forces passed by Planet 8, they left behind 200 primordial bodies and their accompanying larval bodies, planting fungal carpets that would later develop into railguns. Although Planet 8 was small, it was far larger than the primordial bodies. Railguns developed on its surface could grow to immense sizes and potentially provide long-range fire support during critical moments. Planet Izumo, the seventh planet in the Rays system, was a massive gas giant resembling Planet A7 in the Genesis star system. It boasted an impressive array of 19 moons. No matter whether a civilization followed a mechanical or biological route, their theoretical foundations were often similar. The Reckons, unlike the swarm, could not simply latch onto the orbit of a gas giant to absorb its radiation for growth. However, energy conversion was not a complex process. On planet Izumo's many moons, the Reckons had constructed numerous facilities for energy conversion, making it a major production hub for their energy storage systems. The movements of the swarm forces had been under constant surveillance by the Reckons. A massive mobilization like this was impossible to hide under the scrutiny of their gravitational wave detection radars. The swarm made no attempt at concealment, openly signaling that their next target was planet Izumo. Within the Reckon ranks, this revelation sparked intense debate. "We must hold planet Izumo," a strategist exclaimed. "Ha! With what?" another countered. "We can only field about 1,000 warships, while they've got 8,500-meter class space octopuses. How do you propose we fight that? Don't we have a decent number of defensive systems set up around planet Izumo?" "Planet Izumo is a gas giant," a strategist patiently explained, "so it cannot host a planetary defense system. Of its 19 moons, only 11 are large enough to accommodate defensive structures. Moreover, because planet Izumo is so massive, the orbital paths of these moons are highly varied. This makes it difficult to concentrate fire in a single direction, let alone form overlapping fields of fire. That's why Izumo's defenses were given a lower priority." He continued, "Previously, we had to simultaneously construct the defensive systems for planet Rays, the Twin Star Defensive Zone, and our homeworld's defense network. We simply couldn't afford secondary projects. As a result, planet Izumo's defenses are relatively weak." The room fell into silence for a moment before a Reckon general finally spoke. "If we lose planet Izumo, our energy costs will increase by at least 50%. The energy produced by Izumo's resource systems was safe, convenient, and low cost. It primarily supplied the main fleet and the various defense networks. Losing Izumo would force them to rely on energy supplies from the homeworld and other colonies. The production costs alone would be substantial, not to mention the logistical nightmare of transportation. There's no choice, another officer said. Although planet Izumo is critical, our deployments there simply aren't enough to repel a swarm attack. Even if the three main fleets were still at full strength, it wouldn't make a difference. That's correct, agreed General Hamis, a veteran commander who had faced the swarm in battle. Even if we started fortifying Izumo now, it's already too late. Furthermore, we must concentrate our resources where they matter most on the Twin Star defensive zone. That's where we'll make our stand against the swarm. Hamis spoke with the authority of someone who understood the swarm's capabilities all too well. He harbored no illusions about defeating the swarm outright. His goal was simply to stop their advance using the powerful overlapping firepower of the Twin Star defensive zone. Discussions like this had taken place countless times recently. Initially, many Reckons supported the idea of making a stand at planet Izumo. However, after thorough analysis, they realized it was a futile endeavor. For one, establishing robust defenses was nearly impossible. Unlike terrestrial planets like planet Rays, Izumo's moons lacked abundant mineral resources. They couldn't rely on local materials, and the construction costs would be exorbitant. More importantly, they still hadn't figured out how the swarm had infiltrated planet Rays. Theories about genetic mutation and adaptive transformations remained speculative. For now, the only reliable method to counter swarm infiltration was to prevent them from approaching at all. This required an impenetrable firepower network to destroy anything that came close, be it space octopuses or meteors. However, Izumo's environment made such a network infeasible. Once the swarm drew near, it wouldn't take long for those accursed purple-gray fungal carpets to spread across its moons. Chapter 324, Evacuation. If the Reckons had abundant resources, they wouldn't have hesitated to delay the swarm with defensive actions, even at significant cost. But the current reality left no room for such luxuries. Don't worry. We anticipated this situation long ago, one officer said reassuringly. We've already deployed solar sails across near-stellar orbits, covering an area of tens of millions of square kilometers, and we're continuing to expand them. As long as we can keep the swarm outside the Twin Star defensive zone, we won't have to worry about energy supplies. The Reckons' earliest interstellar navigation systems had been built on the foundation of solar sails. These sails not only provided propulsion for their ships but also enabled energy conversion to sustain their daily operational needs. Harvesting energy from a star was an inevitable milestone for any advanced civilization. With shared theoretical principles, many civilizations gravitated toward the concept of Dyson spheres. For the Reckons, enclosing a star and harnessing its energy had no better candidate than solar sails. The technology was mature and relatively cost-effective. Using a special material with a thickness of only 0.0005 mm, the sails could cover vast areas. Even with low energy conversion rates, their advantages in other aspects were undeniable. As a highly intelligent civilization, the Reckons always crafted interconnected contingency plans. The loss of planet Izumo had long been accounted for, with stellar energy collection as the replacement strategy. The Reckons gathered for the meeting were high-ranking officers and strategists, most of whom were already aware of the solar sail initiative. Yet the decision to abandon planet Izumo left a bitter taste in their mouths, a lingering sense of frustration and helplessness. The swarm, however, remained utterly unaffected by the Reckons' internal struggles. The 8,000 primordial bodies pressed forward. Despite the complexities of the star system's environment slowing them somewhat, they covered the distance in just over a month, advancing to within 10 million kilometers of planet Izumo. The Blades, aware from prior intelligence that the Reckons had abandoned the planet, still pretended ignorance, carrying out token reconnaissance. As the swarm closed the gap, the moons of planet Izumo, lacking atmospheric cover, were easily observable by optical detection systems. The moons presented a desolate scene. Within the observable areas, there was no sign of units that could pose a threat to the swarm. When the distance narrowed to 2 million kilometers, the primordial bodies slowed to a cautious 10 kilometers per second. At this speed, they would reach planet Izumo's orbit within 2 days. Several hundred-meter mature bodies, their surfaces crawling with larval bodies, broke off from the main fleet and sped toward planet Izumo ahead of the rest. The Reckons' evacuation seemed remarkably thorough. Not a single smart mine had been left in space to hinder the swarm, an extreme measure of resource conservation. In the orbital paths around planet Izumo, space factories originally used for energy production, along with orbital refineries and shipyards, had been hauled away by tug ships. These facilities had been designed with relocation in mind, a consideration drawn from earlier experience with the Planet Ray's defensive zone, where numerous logistics factories had also been moved at the outset of hostilities. The relocation process required tug ships equipped with over 10 high-power engines to drag the structures out of Izumo's orbit. Once freed from the planet's gravitational pull, the factories were linked to tractor ships, each boasting an even number of high-power engines. Without planetary gravity, a single tractor ship could tow hundreds of space factories, resembling an interstellar freight train from afar. This high-efficiency process ensured that the combined total of over 10,000 space factories from the Planet Ray's defensive zone and those originally stationed in Izumo's orbit were evacuated in just a few rounds. The relocation of factories and equipment on Izumo's moons proved more challenging. Most of these facilities were modular in design, enabling dismantling by specialized machinery. The modules were then launched into space using makeshift electromagnetic launchers, where they were retrieved and transported by waiting ships. The electromagnetic launchers constructed by the Rykans bore a striking resemblance to the biological megastructures of the swarm. Resembling enormous roller coaster tracks, these hastily assembled systems were crude but effective. Each launch could hurl modular structures weighing tens of tons into space. Once their transport tasks were complete, the electromagnetic launchers were dismantled and hauled away by swarms of small transport ships. The star system named after the Rykans was their home turf, where their operational efficiency reached its peak. Within this domain, their forces exhibited exceptional coordination and synergy, far surpassing the performance of their expeditionary fleets. On the moons of planet Izumo, all significant structures had long been dismantled and evacuated, leaving behind only gaping craters. Most of the Rykan installations on the moons had underground components, which were predominantly modular in design but fused tightly with the surrounding rock and soil. These underground structures were harder to disassemble, and logistical constraints further limited their evacuation. As a result, only the most critical underground facilities were removed, while the remainder were destroyed. The moons were left pockmarked with craters. Since the onset of war, both sides had gone to great lengths to protect the secrets of their technological systems. For example, the swarm's creations were safeguarded by genetic locks, while the Rykans, even during emergency retreats, prioritized destroying any ships or facilities they couldn't take with them. What the Rykans didn't know, however, was that the swarm didn't require intact Rykan technology to extract value. Even if a structure were reduced to rubble or dissolved into liquid using specialized chemical agents, the swarm could still harvest it for nutrients to fuel their growth. The mature bodies and larval bodies sent ahead for reconnaissance dispersed across the moons of planet Izumo, carefully inspecting for any hidden Rykan surveillance devices. These devices undoubtedly existed. The Rykans wouldn't miss any opportunity to study the swarm. The cost of these monitoring systems was negligible, and their loss wasn't significant. But if any of them managed to capture critical swarm data, the Rykans would gain invaluable insights. The swarm, aware of this, refused to allow such a possibility. Multiple waves of mature and larval bodies were dispatched, meticulously sweeping the moons. Only after thorough inspections confirmed the destruction of every surveillance device did the larval bodies burrow underground and transform into fungal carpet seeds. They're incredibly cautious. All of our surveillance systems have been destroyed without exception, one Rykan officer reported. Damn it, another cursed. As expected. Stop being misled by their appearance. The battles we've fought so far have proven that their intelligence is on par with our own, if not greater, a third officer interjected. Even after repeated losses, Rykan arrogance only allowed them to grudgingly acknowledge the swarm's intelligence as equal to their own, something they regarded as an extraordinary concession. Fortunately, our contingency measures remain undiscovered. We might still delay their advance. The enemy is being uncharacteristically cautious. Those 500-meter class space octopuses are still maintaining their distance from planet Izumo. We must act now. If this continues, our hidden measures might be exposed. Chapter 325, Hidden Perils. No, it's not enough, there are too few swarm units entering the battlefield now. Not even a single 500-meter class unit has appeared yet. Activating it now is meaningless. A Rykan general objected. Exactly. Eliminating a few 100-meter class space octopuses will have no impact on the battle. Alsa echoed. Despite the loss in the second defense of planet Rays, he remained the fleet commander of the 3rd Space Fleet, his voice carrying more weight than most peers. But if we delay any longer, our arrangement might be discovered. Then don't activate it at all. This plan is already incredibly risky. If it backfires, we'll be the ones to suffer, another general remarked dismissively, clearly against the plan. We can't just do nothing. If we don't stop them, our chances of victory are too slim. Exactly. If their true goal is the treasure, then our conflict is practically irreconcilable. We're at a disadvantage now, so we must do everything possible to weaken them. It's not that serious, is it? While our technological paths differ from the swarms, our actual technological levels are comparable. We've already begun harnessing solar energy, and with the treasure's aid, our technological advancement will undoubtedly accelerate. Time is on our side. As long as we can hold off and delay the swarm's offensive, the scales of victory will gradually tip in our favor, a general argued skeptically. I agree with Major General Porter. Their supply line spans 5 light-years, while we have the support of half a star system. They cannot compete with us in a war of attrition. Gentlemen, perhaps in your haste to convene this meeting, you neglected to read the latest intelligence from the General Staff. Allow me to summarize, President Antonio interrupted, slapping the table to silence the room. Our technicians, through extensive comparisons and analyses, have discovered that the T85 star system might not be the swarm's home system. Like us, they appear to be outsiders in the T85 star system. How is that possible? Arekin exclaimed. Why wouldn't it be possible? I've harbored doubts about this for some time. We achieved our current level of technology within a short span due to the treasure's assistance. But they're entirely different. Who knows how many years it took them to reach their current level? Can you imagine a civilization sitting quietly for so many years? Think about a century ago, when we were driven by solar sail propulsion already eager to colonize other star systems. Ha! How do you know they didn't acquire something similar to our treasure? Besides, maybe they're just a civilization without desires or ambitions. Zik. Oh, you're stationed on planet Riven now, aren't you? Did you forget to wear your protective suit when you went out? Are you suffering from hypoxia and neurological damage? No Reckon in their right mind would make such a ridiculous statement, retorted Richard. Richard. Are you looking for a fight? Bring it on. I'm on planet Raiwu. If you start now, you might make it in time for tomorrow's dinner at the hospital. Silence. Antonio coughed a few times, cutting off the escalating quarrel. Mind your words, gentlemen. And Major Zik, please think carefully before you speak. The twin star system was exceptionally peculiar, centered around 2 nearly identical stars. These twin stars maintained a delicate gravitational balance, orbiting each other while influencing the planets and other celestial bodies within the system. It is precisely because of this that there is still an unresolved debate among the Reckon people about the classification of the 5th and 6th planets within the larger twin star system. Due to the proximity of the twin stars, the stationed officers in this system benefit from low-latency video conferences. However, the twin star system is still some distance from the Reckon home world, resulting in communication delays of 3 to 15 minutes. Under such conditions, real-time strategic meetings are unfeasible. Hence, President Antonio himself traveled the vast distance to the twin star system with key personnel to convene this meeting. His objectives included gathering opinions, deliberating strategies, and reinforcing his authority over the military. The president's rebuke carried considerable weight, but Major Zik still muttered under his breath, "What words should I be mindful of?" Though quiet, his comment was clearly audible through the video feed. President Antonio's expression shifted imperceptibly, an almost unnoticeable furrow of his brow. Zik had always been a thorn in his side, stationed outside the home world and thus interacting with Antonio infrequently. This distance bred a certain lack of respect. Richard, noticing Antonio's reaction, immediately took the hint. Zik. Let's put aside whether the swarm possesses some treasure. Don't you understand that only interests drive technological progress? If the swarm were truly devoid of desire, they would never have reached their current level. Saying something so brainless, shouldn't you think before you speak? Still unconvinced, Zik retorted, couldn't it be that the Creator favored them, granting them this level of development from the outset? Without natural enemies, they would naturally have no desires or ambitions. It's only our appearance that has angered them. This theory had been circulating on Reckon networks. The swarm's external forms were so far removed from anything resembling intelligent life that some Rikans, ignorant of the facts, concocted this idea. Surprisingly, it had garnered a considerable following. The Rikans had pursued militaristic policies for decades, pouring nearly all resources into war-related industries. While the common people were not destitute, their quality of life was far from satisfying. Despite the external threat posed by the swarm, the long-standing accumulation of negative sentiment was not easily eradicated. Many were dissatisfied with the Rikan leadership, believing the swarm to be a harmless species whose retaliation was provoked by Rikan aggression. Advocates of negotiation and peace argued for reducing military expenditures to focus on civilian development and improving living standards. This dissatisfaction even gave rise to bizarre and mystical ideologies. Fortunately, the Rikan were under military governance, with wartime regulations suppressing most dissent. While overt issues were controlled, the seeds of discontent had already been planted, leaving the future uncertain. Antonio was well aware of these undercurrents, knowing they could never be entirely eradicated. However, he had never expected such ideas to infiltrate the upper echelons of the military. His frown deepened. It seemed Zik would need to be thoroughly investigated. Under no circumstances could he allow any subversion during critical moments of conflict. If Zik sought to disgrace himself, so be it, but Antonio would not tolerate collateral damage to his own reputation. Clearing his throat, he cut off Major Richard, who was about to continue his rebuttal, and said, "Gentlemen, the claim that the swarm are outsiders in the T-85 star system is not baseless. The General Staff wouldn't make such statements without evidence." With that, Antonio gestured toward the screen in front of him, sharing a series of documents with the assembled Rikan officials. Chapter 326, Activation. T-81 star system. The Rikan designation for the swarm's origin system shows a steady dimming of its star's brightness. Each year, the luminosity decreases by approximately 0.26%. Could this indicate the presence of a highly advanced civilization constructing a Dyson sphere to harness stellar energy? A Rikan official exclaimed in shock as he reviewed the data. This change has been ongoing for decades. Their progress is far ahead of ours. The Rikan had only just begun experimenting with similar structures, and even those efforts were in their infancy. By contrast, the technology employed by the other side appeared far more advanced and mature. The T-81 star system is roughly 5 light-years from T-85, about the same distance as ours. It's 9 light-years away from us. Luckily, the T-85 star system acts as a buffer. Otherwise, we'd be in serious trouble. It seems their technological level is slightly higher than ours. For them to reach us, they'd first have to get through the swarm. Why haven't they attacked the T-85 star system? Doing so might force the swarm to withdraw. Maybe we should consider sending an envoy to this civilization. There's a chance we could form an alliance against the swarm. Did you forget what President Antonio just said? Haven't you considered the possibility that the civilization in the T-81 star system might also be part of the swarm? Richard could no longer restrain himself. At Richard's words, the room fell into stunned silence. If the T-81 star system was indeed under swarm control, the implications were dire. This would suggest the swarm had already conquered 2 or more star systems, exponentially increasing their access to strategic resources and introducing countless new variables into the equation. Currently, the swarm forces assaulting the Rikan star system were only from the T-85 star system. If the swarm controlled multiple systems, it was likely other forces from additional systems were en route, hindered only by the vast distances involved. The Rikans were already struggling to contend with forces from a single swarm-occupied system. If reinforcements from additional systems arrived, surrender might become their only option. This was no idle alarmism but a genuine crisis staring the Rikans in the face. According to projections from the General Staff, if reinforcements were indeed coming from the T-81 star system, the swarm's highest demonstrated travel speeds suggested they would require about 50 years to reach the Rikan star system. Since the Rikan Expeditionary Force's defeat in the T-85 star system, over 40 years had passed. This meant that if the swarm occupied the T-81 star system, reinforcements from there could arrive within just a few years. Such a scenario rendered the previously discussed delay tactics laughable. The T-81 star system had likely been under swarm occupation for a considerable duration. Judging by the changes in the star's luminosity, it could be inferred that the swarm had been consolidating its power there for a long time. Any reinforcements from the T-81 system would likely dwarf the forces currently attacking from T-85. If the swarm forces from both systems encircled the Rikans, their defenses would collapse in no time. The only slight consolation was that, apart from the T81 star system, the other systems in the T85 region were over 10 light-years away from the Recon star system. Even if those systems had also fallen to the swarm, any dispatched forces would not arrive in the Recon star system for quite some time. This meant the Recons might face attacks from only 2 swarm-occupied systems in the short term, a grim prospect, but, compared to earlier fears, perhaps a faint silver lining. It seems we have no choice now. Though the Recons had resolved to take decisive action, the swarm was displaying exceptional caution. A massive number of mature bodies and larval bodies had been deployed, but the primordial bodies remained lurking hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from planet Izumo. This distance is already beyond what can be considered safe. I think it's time to activate. I believe we can wait a little longer. At their current position, if they retreat in time, their losses won't be significant. That's not guaranteed. There are too many unpredictable factors in this plan, and even we don't know the exact extent of its effects. Do you think our plan has been leaked? How could that be? After all, they've already ventured deep into our territory. It's natural for them to act cautiously. Then let's wait a bit longer. Our preparations shouldn't be so easily discovered. Are we being too cautious? This doesn't quite align with our usual style, Sarah Kerrigan remarked, reading the report in front of her. It does feel that way, but our forces are already positioned at the outermost orbit of planet Izumo. There's no real issue, Morgan replied after some thought. Then let's send 500 primordial bodies as a token move. If we don't advance, the Recons won't activate their plan, and we'll just be wasting time. Your Majesty, delaying seems to align with our strategic goals, said Tella, the former captain of the Royal Guard, with a hint of doubt. That was the case before, but the Overlord has some new ideas now, Sarah patiently explained to Tella, someone very close to her. Tella nodded in understanding. Sarah, as always, had direct access to first-hand information from the Overlord. They're moving. A Recon observer, monitoring the primordial body's movements, exclaimed. How many? They're cloaked, and their clustering causes gravitational wave interference. We can only estimate around 500. That's a bit low, a Recon officer muttered, unwilling to speculate further. He promptly reported the information, as decisions were above his pay grade. 500 units? Should we activate? Activate. Our setup is on the verge of being discovered. Dragging this out any longer is pointless. Besides, even if we activate now, it will take some time. More swarm forces might approach in the meantime. Planet Izumo, a massive gas giant, was riddled with intense hurricanes and lightning storms. Igniting this behemoth required one of 2 methods. The first method involved increasing the planet's mass. If its mass reached 80 to 100 times its current size, the gravitational force would compress the planetary core enough to trigger hydrogen fusion, transforming the gas giant into a new star, radiating light and heat. However, this method was far beyond the technological capabilities of the Recon at present. The second method was far more practical. Planet Izumo's atmosphere was rich in flammable hydrogen gas. The reason it hadn't yet exploded into a fiery ball was the lack of a crucial reactant, oxygen. The Recons, native to their star system and long familiar with planet Izumo, had discovered large quantities of solid oxygen in the depths of the planet's moons. By extracting and injecting these oxygen-rich solids into planet Izumo, they could trigger a massive explosion. While igniting the entire gas giant into a star was far-fetched, initiating a devastating explosion was well within reach. If the plan succeeded, the explosion would deal catastrophic damage to the swarm forces, potentially neutralizing their current offensive. Chapter 327, Detonation. Once the Recon's plan was approved and set into motion, they targeted 3 of planet Izumo's moon satellites 2, 3, and 5. These small celestial bodies, each less than 1,000 kilometers in diameter, became focal points for their operation. Through meticulous calculations, the Recons installed the radiance of the Recon's supernuclear bombs at critical nodes on these moons. This endeavor depleted nearly all of their stockpile of these powerful weapons. 10. 9. 8. 7. 3. 2. 1. Boom. The nuclear devices detonated in succession as the moons reached their designated positions. The calculated detonation points not only unleashed the massive power of the bombs themselves but also triggered additional effects due to the unique properties of these locations. The moons trembled under the explosions. Cracks split their surfaces as enormous energy surged through, yet the fissures were insufficient to release the pressure. The cracks widened under the force, hurling fragments of the moons into the void. The once smooth moons began to deform as their structures broke apart. The chain reactions intensified, and under the immense gravitational pull of planet Izumo, the fractured moons ultimately shattered. Though fragmented, the resulting debris was still enormous, and the explosions had knocked the remnants out of their original orbits. With their gravitational balance disrupted, some fragments were pulled toward planet Izumo, while others struggled against its gravity. The resulting debris field spiraled toward the planet. An awe-inspiring astronomical phenomenon unfolded, resembling a massive tornado. The swirling debris from the shattered moons mixed with planet Izumo's atmosphere, creating a spectacular and destructive display. Finally, fragments containing concentrated oxygen crashed into planet Izumo. As the oxygen-rich debris interacted with the hydrogen-laden atmosphere, an enormous fireball erupted, akin to a massive firework igniting in the sky. The flames raced upward through the atmospheric vortex, setting off a chain of explosions as the broken moon fragments ignited and scattered debris in every direction. Billions of rock fragments shot outward, striking everything in their path. Other moons in planet Izumo's orbit were the first to suffer. Meteor fragments pummeled their surfaces, kicking up dust and leaving countless craters. The fungal carpets spread by the swarm across these moons were devastated. At such close range, the overwhelming saturation of impacts obliterated the purple expanses of swarm colonies, wiping out days of their progress. The destruction extended to the 500 primordial bodies stationed nearby. Against such overwhelming natural forces, they had little chance to resist. Some of their remains likely clung to the fragments that shot into the far reaches of space. The larger swarm clusters stationed farther away detected the energy surge from the nuclear detonations immediately and began to retreat. As the satellites shattered, Recon cannons targeted the largest debris, firing relentlessly to break them down further. Despite these efforts, the swarm suffered severe losses. Though relatively few primordial bodies were completely destroyed, nearly half were rendered combat incapable, requiring time to regenerate. Moreover, the number of mature and larval bodies lost was significantly higher, necessitating a long recovery period. The Ricans had bought themselves precious time, but at a significant cost. The future would reveal whether this bold strategy could tip the balance in their favor. What a spectacular sight! It's a pity that this wasn't enough to annihilate that swarm fleet, Hamis lamented as he watched the scene unfold on the monitors. This was the best we could do. If those moons had been larger, we might not have had any effective options against them, another officer replied. That's true. If we had the capability to destroy larger moons or even planets outright, the swarm wouldn't be a threat to us at all. Blowing up 3 moons only released enough oxygen to sustain the conflagration on planet Izumo for a few dozen minutes. It will be entirely consumed shortly, and planet Izumo itself remains completely unaffected. What's this? Are you thinking about blowing up planet Izumo itself? You'd better think that through. If we did that, our homeworld wouldn't survive either. Ha, don't be ridiculous. I'm just saying it would be harder to blow up planet Izumo than to destroy our homeworld directly. It's beyond our current capabilities. Do we pursue the advantage? The odd tangent of the conversation finally shifted back on track when a Recon Major General posed the question. No, we lack precise detonation control. The scattered debris from the satellites doesn't discriminate between us and the swarm. In a few days, a meteor shower will reach us. We must focus all efforts on intercepting it to minimize damage, otherwise, this operation will have been pointless. As predicted, some fragments from the shattered satellites escaped planet Izumo's gravity under the force of the explosions and scattered into space. Days later, a portion of these fragments reached the defensive perimeter of the Twin Star defensive zone. The Ricans were well versed in dealing with solid kinetic threats akin to electromagnetic slugs. Moreover, perhaps to demonstrate their might and intimidate the swarm, the Ricans spared no effort in their response. Missile silos hidden on Satellite 2 of planet Raiwu opened, launching missiles over 30 meters long. Although not as potent as Radiance of the Ricans, these missiles packed significant explosive power. Trailing long plumes of fire, the missiles targeted the largest debris pieces, those over 10 kilometers in diameter. The goal was not to destroy these fragments entirely but to break them into smaller, more manageable pieces. Several of the behemoths were neutralized with pinpoint precision. Following this, beams of energy laced across space, creating an impenetrable web of firepower. Nearly all meteor fragments disintegrated within this web, and even those that managed to slip through were ground into minuscule pieces, rendering them harmless. Given the Reincarnated intent to showcase their firepower, they went to great lengths. When smaller fragments approached a specific defensive range, streaks of red light cut across the void, utterly annihilating the remaining debris. The Reincarnated's weaponry certainly has its merits. The swarm could benefit from diversifying its attack methods to create better synergies. The Reincarnated display of might was duly noted by the swarm's overlord, but it seemed to have little effect in deterring the swarm's resolve. With the Reincarnated's countermeasure expended, planet Izumo fell fully under the swarm's control. The losses of surface-level fungal carpets on the moons were insignificant to the swarm. Even the 500 primordial bodies and numerous mature and larval bodies lost in the battle were trivial in the grand scheme. The Reincarnated were entirely unaware of what planet Izumo, a massive cosmic battery, represented for the swarm. Had they understood, they would never have so easily abandoned the fight for the gas giant. The fallen primordial bodies were moved into planet Izumo's near orbit, where they could recover more quickly. Meanwhile, the remaining mature and larval bodies carried by the primordial bodies were dispersed across planet Izumo's orbital pathways. On the moons, the purple fungal carpets regrew rapidly. Mutating into brood queen eggs, the fungal carpets gave rise to numerous swarm bases. Within weeks, new larval bodies emerged endlessly from these bases, each seeking its place in planet Izumo's orbital swarm. As planet Izumo became shrouded by a growing mass of space octopuses, the faces of the Reincarnated commanders turned grim. The tide of the battle was shifting ominously in favor of the swarm. Chapter 328, Attrition. I feel like we've made some kind of mistake, Hamis murmured. This scene feels eerily familiar. I think I've figured out how the star in the T81 star system started dimming. Planet Izumo is far more important than we ever imagined. Don't dwell on it. Even if we'd known earlier, there's nothing we could have done. Exactly. Planet Izumo's environment makes it impossible to set up extensive defensive systems. Our fleet alone is no match for the assault of 8,500-meter class space octopuses. Do we currently have any chance to eliminate the swarm near planet Izumo? Another officer asked. The chances are slim. While our previous efforts did eliminate many space octopuses under 100 meters in size, the losses among the 500-meter class units were minimal. Right now, we can only deploy around 2,000 warships, not enough to defeat them. I reviewed the latest reconnaissance footage. Many of those 500-meter class space octopuses appear to be in poor condition. The swarm's situation might be worse than we think. I believe we should take the opportunity to strike, Alcer suggested. I disagree with Alcer. We still don't fully understand what these creatures are. Is it not possible they're deliberately presenting this weakened state to lure us in? What if they've already set a trap? That's a valid point. But are we just going to sit and watch? There's really not much we can do, another officer sighed. This is not worth debating, Antonio concluded. Even if we eliminate the weakened 500-meter class space octopuses, over 4,000 of them would still remain. At that scale, our fleet could engage them in battle but couldn't force them out. Even if we destroy a portion of them, it won't meaningfully impact the overall war, and the risk to our warships would be far too high. It's simply not worth the gamble. Then we'll have to stay on the defensive for now. It seems the swarm isn't in a rush to attack either, another officer observed. Gentlemen, it's now up to you. If there's anything you need, just let me know, Antonio said. After a brief silence, one major general spoke up. If we could miniaturize the laser defense arrays and equip them on our warships, it would significantly improve our combat capabilities. I agree. Solving this issue would indeed provide a substantial boost to our firepower, another added. Very well. I'll push the research division to prioritize this project and allocate manpower and resources accordingly, Antonio promised. To the Reincarnated's surprise, the swarm didn't take long to recover. The primordial bodies, replenished with metal elements, resumed operations. While orbiting planet Izumo to absorb energy, they also mounted electromagnetic railguns and began firing toward the Twin Star defensive zone. The region between planet Izumo and the Twin Star defensive zone was largely unobstructed. What few obstacles there were, neutral structures incapable of evasion, were swiftly obliterated by successive railgun salvos. These stationary targets were easy to predict and eliminate with precise calculations. The swarm's relentless bombardment signaled that their counter-offensive had already begun, leaving the Reincarnated with little time to prepare for the storm that was about to descend. The advantages of kinetic weaponry were fully evident at this moment. In the near-vacuum environment of space, as long as there were no obstructions or gravitational interference, electromagnetic projectiles could theoretically travel an infinite distance. When launched from planet Izumos orbit, the projectiles fired by the swarm's railguns took several days to reach the twin star defensive zone. Hitting mobile fleet units was out of the question, and even slow-moving targets like orbital cannons were difficult to strike. However, fixed targets like ground-based laser defense arrays and planetary artillery installations were well within reach. Through optical observation and successive test firings, the swarm railguns gradually improved their accuracy. With adjustments for additional parameters, the electromagnetic projectiles achieved a respectable hit rate. Were it not for the laser defense arrays, the immobile ground facilities of the Rikons would likely have been eroded away over time. Though unable to deal significant damage to the Rikon installations, the railgun bombardment still served other purposes. For the space octopuses, launching railgun projectiles was relatively inexpensive, consuming only moderate amounts of energy, metal elements, and a small degree of body tissue wear. Here, the strengths of biotechnology shone. The cells that aged or sustained significant damage during the process were quickly metabolized and replaced with new ones, allowing the railguns to maintain a steady rate of fire without interruption. On the Rikon side, the constant harassment fire from the swarm was maddening. On average, around 10,000 electromagnetic projectiles rained down on their defensive lines every 10 minutes. This forced the Rikon defensive interception systems to remain active at all times. While the relatively small number of projectiles meant only a limited number of laser arrays had to be operational simultaneously, the swarm's continuous, unrelenting attacks strained the system heavily. Though the Rikons rotated their laser arrays for rest and maintenance to avoid wear from high-intensity usage, the frequent operation led to accelerated aging of many precision components, necessitating regular repairs and replacements. Meanwhile, the swarm's forces around planet Izumo continued to grow. Reinforcements of primordial bodies from the neighboring star system were routed to planet Rays for minor repairs before being deployed to Izumos vicinity. Additionally, primordial bodies recovering near the cosmic battery of planet Izumo showed rapid recuperation. Units with lighter injuries prioritized restoring their railgun functions, joining the bombardment effort even before their propulsion systems were fully operational. Mature bodies also rapidly evolved, ascending to join the primordial ranks. Meanwhile, the surfaces of Izumos moons were increasingly covered with the swarm's purple-gray fungal carpets. These carpets gave rise to ground-based electromagnetic railgun emplacements. While akin to planetary artillery, the lack of atmospheric interference allowed these satellite-based cannons to participate effectively in long-range bombardment. Within a year, the number of electromagnetic projectiles launched every 10 minutes doubled to 20,000. This development placed an even greater strain on the Rikon defenses, exacerbating their already precarious situation. In summary, reported a Rikon Major General, 8% of our laser defense array components need replacement every 3 days, 14% every 7 days, and the remaining 78%, comprising larger, cast components, are at risk of wear-related failure. While these larger parts don't require frequent replacement, their gradual degradation poses a hidden risk. Ideally, they should be replaced annually, which is essentially equivalent to rebuilding an entire defensive array. The large cast components aren't much of an issue, another officer added. Our space factories can easily produce them, using asteroids as raw material. The real problem lies with the frequently replaced precision components. Their manufacturing is highly complex, requiring the facilities of the home world or the first and second colonies. On top of that, transportation logistics are cumbersome, consuming vast amounts of our resources. The Rikon's officers furrowed their brows in unison. Chapter 329, Counterattack. There aren't many asteroids left. Most of them are now concentrated at the outskirts of the star system and in planet Izumos orbit, both areas currently occupied by the swarm. Even though we hauled away a significant number of asteroids when we evacuated from planet Izumo, it hasn't been enough to sustain such heavy consumption. Additionally, producing those components is straining the capacity of our space factories. Just the recent round of base replacements severely slowed down our warship production, a Rikon officer reported gravely. This won't work. At this rate, the swarm won't even need to attack us, we'll wear ourselves out first. And this is only the current situation. Their firepower output points are increasing rapidly. In planet Izumos orbit, we've identified 2 swarm constructs that are growing daily. We don't know what they're for, but it's safe to assume they're bad news for us. Is there any good news? Someone asked. Well, we've confirmed that the swarm space octopuses grow over time. They can evolve from 10-meter class to 100-meter class, and from there to 500-meter class. Although we noticed signs of this growth back in the asteroid belt, it wasn't as apparent then. Now, we can finally confirm it. I don't think that's good news. Agreed. So, are you saying that if we let time drag on, we'll end up facing an endless tide of 500-meter class space octopuses? That's not entirely accurate. Oh? What's incorrect? 500 meters isn't their limit. To be precise, we may eventually face space octopuses exceeding 1,000 meters. Ha, what a delightful surprise. If this news gets out and the swarm opens up a surrender hotline, the phones would undoubtedly explode with calls. Shut up. Don't let me hear such morale-damaging nonsense again. Humph. The Rykans bickered noisily. The overwhelming pressure brought by the swarm had kept them on edge for so long that it was taking a toll on their mental stability. Is there any way we can cause them some trouble? Hamis finally brought the discussion back to a constructive track. It's difficult. Our energy weapons may have a fast firing rate, but their range has always been a weakness. We can't hit planet Izumo from here. Missiles are an option, but they're costly, easy to intercept, and not cost-effective, a Reckon weapons officer answered after some thought. Can't we build electromagnetic railguns too? President Antonio has already assigned the research department to look into it. While we have the theoretical foundation, building railguns is a significant departure from our existing technology. It requires extensive testing. The earliest we could field usable prototypes would be next year. I propose sending out the fleets to harass the enemy. This might draw away some of their firepower, suggested a Reckon Major General. That's too dangerous. If their maneuvers fail, the losses could be catastrophic. We can't afford to lose any more warships, another officer objected. I think it's a feasible plan. We've gained considerable experience in dodging electromagnetic projectiles. As long as we maintain a safe distance, the warships should be relatively secure. If the swarm splits its firepower to attack our fleets, even partially, it would relieve pressure on the laser defense array. After deliberation, the three incomplete fleets began to deploy. Following nearly 2 years of recovery and reorganization, the three fleets had received reinforcements from newly built warships, bringing their total to over 2,200 vessels. However, more than 500 ships were still undergoing repairs and unable to participate in operations. The remaining 1,700 warships split into three formations and advanced towards planet Izumo in an aggressive posture, hoping to draw the swarm's fire. However, not only were the Reckon internal discussions virtually transparent to the Blades, but the swarm had also gained considerable experience countering such harassment tactics from their numerous encounters. In the early stages of the war, such a bold move by the Reckons would have prompted an immediate response from the primordial bodies. Now, however, the swarm remained unperturbed in the face of this feigned assault. When it came to a direct confrontation between electromagnetic railguns and energy cannons, if both sides had equal numbers and were within each other's range, energy cannons held a distinct advantage. In a head-to-head battle, the Reckons' fleets were likely to come out on top, but only just. Thus, when the swarm forces were numerically inferior, they relied on the range advantage of their electromagnetic railguns to continuously fire and prevent the Reckon fleets from closing in. However, swarm combat units were significantly cheaper to produce compared to mechanical warships, making it easy for the swarm to achieve numerical superiority. Once they gained the upper hand in numbers, such aggressive tactics from the Reckon ceased to pose a significant threat. When the Reckon fleets entered the swarm's firing range, the flight time of electromagnetic projectiles was greatly reduced. In a scenario where the swarm enjoyed numerical superiority, mutual bombardment could have unpredictable outcomes. Furthermore, under such circumstances, if the Reckon fleets suffered defeat, retreating would become nearly impossible. The swarm could afford to absorb losses, whereas the Reckons could not. Consequently, after the primordial bodies reached a critical mass, the best strategy for countering the Reckons' feigned assaults was to simply ignore them. Come closer if you dare, stop posturing at a distance. This was the attitude of the swarm's blades. Currently, the swarm occupied planet Izumo and its dozen moons, with numerous ground-based cannons and thousands of primordial bodies in orbit. They held an overwhelming numerical advantage. If the Reckon fleets truly dared to engage, it would be akin to feeding dumplings to a dog; they would never get them back. In such a scenario, even if the swarm traded 2 units for every 1 Reckon ship or even 3 for 1, it would still come out ahead. Does it seem like our tactics have failed? The Reckon fleets flirted repeatedly with disaster, skirting the edge of recklessness. Yet the swarm responded to their maneuvers with utter indifference. No matter how aggressive the Recons acted, the swarm didn't bother firing a single electromagnetic projectile in response. In the end, the Recon fleets wasted a vast amount of energy only to return to their starports empty-handed and humiliated. For now, we can only wait for our electromagnetic railguns to be ready. This powerless, one-sided beating will have to continue for a while. It seems that's our only choice. This is infuriating. Time passed quickly as both sides fell into a temporary stalemate. Apart from the daily routine of electromagnetic bombardments and laser intercepts, there was little action from either side. Finally, the long-awaited Recon electromagnetic railguns were completed and began mass production. Supported by a robust industrial base, over 2,000 railguns were erected on the twin star system's planets and moons within a few months. The Recon railguns operated on principles similar to the swarms, but the Recons leveraged specially formulated metals and precision-engineered mechanical structures, granting their railguns superior performance in several key areas. The most noticeable improvement was their firing speed, which was nearly double that of the swarm's railguns. In essence, the Recon's 2,000 railguns could produce the firepower of 4,000 swarm railguns. Finally, the time has come for our counterattack. Chapter 330, Returning the Favor. War between civilizations is a process of mutual learning and adaptation, each borrowing from the other's strengths to overcome weaknesses. Just as the swarm had studied and adopted the Recon's propulsion systems, observation technologies, and computer hardware and software, the Recons, too, sought to learn from the swarm. On this historic day, the Recon electromagnetic railguns were fired at an extraterrestrial force for the first time, marking a new chapter in the war's turning point. Is this what the Overlord meant by using the strengths of the enemy against them? Sarah Kerrigan remarked with a casual laugh, watching the Recon side unleash a barrage of thousands of railgun rounds. Morgan, feeling a bit awkward, whispered, "Your Majesty, while the meaning fits, if we view it from the Recon perspective, it doesn't put us in the best light." "Haha, they'll soon discover that we can use the same trick against them," Sarah replied confidently. The electromagnetic projectiles emitted only a faint spark of electricity as they left the barrels, their subsequent flight through the void utterly silent. Over 2,000 rounds streaked across the vastness of space, heading toward Satellite 14 of planet Izumo. The primordial bodies stationed in orbit around planet Izumo lay motionless, seemingly indifferent. However, much like warships, they could easily evade such projectiles by making slight movements during the round's long travel time. Targeting them was not cost-effective. Among Izumo's many moons, Satellite 14 was the most favorable target due to its position within the Recon's firing range and line of sight. Given the immense distance between the two sides over 100 million kilometers, a slight deviation of just a millimeter at launch could result in significant inaccuracy over such a range. Satellite 14, with a diameter of just over 1,000 kilometers, saw half of the Recon's initial barrage miss it entirely. The swarm paid no attention to such wildly inaccurate attacks, and the Recons didn't mind either. This volley was merely for calibration. After analyzing the feedback, the Recons adjusted their targeting and unleashed a second volley. This round proved far more accurate and significantly more threatening. However, the swarm had anticipated this development. New combat units ascended into the skies, hovering at altitudes of several thousand kilometers. Their round, eyeball-like appearance earned them the name laser eye bugs. As the electromagnetic rounds approached, these units quickly adjusted their angles, emitting beams of red laser light from apertures in their bodies to melt the incoming projectiles. For the swarm, creating such laser-based defensive units based on existing laser generation theories was relatively simple. However, due to the limitations of biological materials, these swarm versions of laser defense weapons had a much shorter effective range than their Recon counterparts, maxing out at just 50 kilometers. Fortunately, the swarm's versions were far more mobile. Unlike the Recon's immobile, massive installations, the swarm's units were small and agile. They began life as box-like objects just over 10 centimeters in size, growing like fruits on specialized fungal carpets, drawing nutrients to develop. Upon reaching a size of 10 meters, they were considered mature, achieving the standard 50-kilometer effective range. Though they could continue growing, doing so consumed excessive resources and offered diminishing returns, making it an inefficient investment. These units could operate independently or integrate with propulsion modules for mobility, allowing them to intercept projectiles along calculated trajectories. When integrated with space octopuses, they became a critical component of the primordial bodies. Thus, the Recon's long-coveted ship-mounted laser defense array was first achieved by the swarm. Fire, commanded Homies, fleet commander of the First Space Fleet and one of the most powerful figures in the Reikan military. He relished the honor of initiating the first barrage of their new weapon, his voice heralding a shift in the tides of war. But while the Reikan railguns roared, the swarm remained unperturbed, their evolutionary adaptability ever a step ahead. However, apart from its short range, the laser eye bug shares a common flaw with all laser-based weapons: high energy consumption. An independent laser eye bug, after being fully charged, can only fire 3 shots before requiring a recharge. In other words, it can intercept at most 3 electromagnetic projectiles before needing to replenish its energy. For recharging, the bugs can rely on self-sustained dormant charging, but this process is slow, taking several days to fully recharge. The only way to recharge rapidly is by linking to the fungal carpet. This limitation explains why the laser eye bugs are currently only integrated into primordial bodies. These massive entities are equipped with atomic furnaces, providing the bugs with the energy needed to maintain their operational consumption. The swarm's strategy of learning from the Reikans and turning their technology back against them left the Reikan high-ranking officers dumbfounded. They must have reverse-engineered our laser defense array on planet Rays and created these knockoffs. This proves it beyond a doubt they're definitely not a native species. I've always said that theory was nonsense. Humph, their defensive array is much smaller than ours. They might have had the technology for some time but chose not to reveal it until now. That makes sense. Our energy beam weapons couldn't be intercepted before, so even if they had this weapon type, they had no opportunity to showcase it. Alright, enough speculation. This isn't some advanced technology, it's no surprise they possess it. Let's focus. Should we continue attacking? Of course. If they won't let us rest, we won't let them rest either. And so, the swarm and the Reikans entered a daily cycle of attack and interception. While it appeared on the surface that both sides were evenly matched, the actual rate of resource depletion was anything but equal. Take, for example, the wear and tear on critical components. The Reikans could only replace damaged parts with new ones, while the swarm's units could simply regenerate through biological metabolism. Over time, the Reikans were at risk of being worn down. Although the Reikan language lacks a direct equivalent to the phrase boiling a frog in warm water, they fully understood the concept. Faced with this slow attrition, they were deeply troubled but had no clear solution. The Reikan warships were produced through efficient assembly lines. Their advanced automated industry allowed for streamlined and effective production. Various modules were cast into shape, assembled in space factories, and then deployed into the battle. The entire process was incredibly efficient. In contrast, the swarm's production of space octopuses was far cruder yet equally effective. A mature brood queen could lay several half-meter-tall space octopus eggs daily. These eggs, after a period of incubation, would hatch into larvae about half a meter long. Adjacent to the brood chambers, the swarm maintained heavily protected nursery chambers constructed from irradiated metal. These critical facilities, buried thousands of meters underground, were fortified and highly secure. Within the safety of the nursery chambers, the larvae absorbed radiation and grew to 2 meters in length. At this stage, they were expelled to the planet's surface, where they continued to absorb cosmic radiation for further growth. Upon reaching a size of 5 meters, these young octopuses earned their place as expendable cannon fodder and were granted the privilege of moving to the low orbit of gas giants like Izumo to continue maturing. Here, their growth persisted. If untouched by war or death, these creatures would, over time, develop into fully fledged primordial bodies. This biological manufacturing system meant that while the Reikan's assembly line fleets could achieve combat readiness much faster in the early stages, given enough time, the swarm's exponential growth capabilities would astound and overwhelm anyone.